how did you pick the decision to get into therapy? And has that thought process changed?
I think your story is more interesting, so I'll go first. I was interested in everything, and so I changed majors a couple times, but I noticed people liked to talk to me because I was a good listener. And then, to be frank, I fell in love with a man who always knew he wanted to be a psychologist, and so that kind of nudged me a little bit into this area. I was all over the map. I have grown into just a gratitude for being able to help people. It's become much more meaningful as I went, but I don't think it started out particularly.
So my journey is a little unusual in the sense that for whatever reasons I knew what I wanted to do very early in life. I would listen to a Christian psychologist on the radio, back in those days, it's the 60s now, and say that just got to be the coolest thing to be able to help people with their issues and be able to do it professionally. So I always knew that's what I wanted to do. I just moved toward that goal as quickly as we could get there, probably a little too quickly, looking back on that, but we moved out here to California, to La Mirada, and I went to graduate school and earned my doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and then came back to Maryland and set up practice with some friends. So it's always been there for me. I think it's just, people are fascinating. I've never felt like this is boring. I haven't had a moment of boredom in 30-some years of doing this, because even though everybody's the same, they're not. And everybody's situation's a little different, and just when you think you've seen it all, something happens. Or somebody comes through the door, and to me, it's just fascinating. There's just no limit to it.
So it's maybe both your love for people and just genuine interest in people. Now, would you say you have to have high emotional IQ in order to be a therapist? I
think so. I think you have to be very willing to spend your time in someone else's head, because that's pretty much what we do. We spend our time in someone else's head, and so you got to understand human nature and human behavior and all that, and you have to care that they're hurting. And sometimes we have to work to find the hurt, because sometimes they come in and they're upset and they're angry and they're depressed, and it takes a while to get to that place, but we know it's there. So it's been challenging. Some of my most difficult cases, I would say, are my DID patients, and that's dissociative identity disorder, what we used to call multiple personalities. And for whatever reason, I have had more than any of my colleagues have had over the years. And they don't always come in and say, hey, by the way, I got 16 alders. That doesn't happen. They come in with something else, and then over time, it just starts emerging as they begin to trust me. So over 30 years, I've had 4 or 5 different patients who've had that disorder, which is pretty unusual. There's actually some mental health professionals who don't even think that disorder exists. And I'm just here to tell you it absolutely does. So those have been really particularly fascinating to me, because I see how God has set up our brains to be able to cope with horrible, horrible trauma and still come out intact. It's a defensive mechanism that He's built into us, where you can split into these different people who hold particular traumas or issues and still be able to function. So it's been very fascinating to see how that happens. It is hard. It is draining. I won't lie. I hear about things that most people will never, ever hear, just what people can do to people, and what we can say the word abuse, but you have not understood abuse until you have sat with someone who's been satanically, ritually abused. The face of evil. And I've had to do that a few times. Early in my career, too, which just blew me out of the water, to be honest. So all these experiences, though, I find that God sends me the people He wants me to work with. Someone comes through my door, I really feel like that was meant to be. And I look at some of these more difficult cases, and I feel like I was the person that God said, you need to help this. Some of these folks I've been seeing for 10, 15 years, because that's what they need. And some of them will never actually be functional, fully functional. And that's part of that is both of us have to accept that some people either don't want help, they'll stay a few sessions and take off because they don't really want to face, they're not ready to face their issues. And some we can only help a little bit, just incrementally, and help them make progress, but not ever be back to what they could have been had these things not happened to them. So we live with a lot of that understanding that most people just couldn't really relate to. That's why I'm so thankful I've got a wife who does this similar work that I do. So, when I come home looking like I've been run over by a semi twice, she knows exactly what kind of day I've had. We don't even need to talk about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And we can't talk about it.
And we don't.
Because of confidentiality. Attunement is huge, and I think you have to have emotional IQ to have attunement to what your client is feeling, and I mean, sometimes a therapist can see things they can't see themselves. So, I think emotional IQ is huge in terms of attunement, and you develop that. Of course, that's what I wanted to say. His program required all the students to have at least 500 hours of their own personal therapy. I went to Cal State Fullerton. They had a clinical community master's in science, but I chose to do the same thing, and I really think that really helped us. We took care of our own wounds, our own challenges, our own issues first before we started working in the field. And I think that really helped with the emotional IQ because, again, we're self-aware, so we're not putting our stuff onto our clients and trying to fix ourselves through the clients. And there are a lot of therapists who are doing that. So, emotional intelligence is huge.
So they're a kind of work in progress, and that's unhealthy for someone like that to be.
You have a question on
therapist.
here about, somewhere in here about how do you know you're picking a good therapist? Some of that is just intuitive. You can ask your therapist questions. You can interview them, especially that first session or two, and you might ask them, have you worked on your own? Have you been in counseling? I think it's a fair question.
Sure, yeah.
I remember the first time I found out that there was a PhD clinical psychology graduate who was graduating with that degree who had never seen a client. And I asked myself, how does that work exactly? That'd be like selling cars and you don't have a driver's license. You've never been in a car. I just scratched my head on that one. So I'm very thankful for what my school required us to do and for what Rachel chose to do, because I know what it's like to be on the other side.
Right.
And to struggle with being honest with my own therapist and deal with stuff I really don't want to look at. And so having done that, I have a lot of empathy for the struggles people have with getting to the issue and looking it in the eye without blinking. And until they do that, they're kind of running around and I'm waiting for them to land so we can actually do the work. But we understand that process, been there, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, why do we really want to look at this stuff? We really don't, but we need to. But we're not going to, nothing changes, nothing changes.
That's why I say the people I have the most admiration for are my clients, because they have the courage to look at themselves and do the work. So I'm really proud of them.
And what makes you both stay in it? Because this, like you said, emotionally can rub off of you so much. And I'm sure it's very draining. And yet, what keeps you going?
And I guess that's to say I love what I do. And that doesn't minimize the challenges and the days when I'd really rather go play golf or something. But I really get a lot of satisfaction out of doing what I can do. And then every once in a while you get a really big win where someone comes in and they got these issues and they just are amazing and they make progress and you go, that is really cool.
Pumps you up.
Yes, and that doesn't always happen, of course. So but when that does happen, it's like, that's why I do this. That's what keeps us going. We get those big wins occasionally. But most other cases, it's just the grinding it out over the years and just being there, being available to them and seeing those incremental changes come. That's still very rewarding. But we do celebrate the big wins sometimes, too.
I do have faith, too, that I may not see the fruit of my work, but it's out there. It's when you plant a seed, just because the person whose heart you planted the seed in leaves doesn't mean that seed's not going to sprout and grow, you know? So holding on to that too.
That's good.
Right. When I have somebody move on for whatever reasons, I sort of say, tag God, you're it.
Yeah.
Because I know He's deeply invested in them getting better. And I may have been a part of that journey for them, but I'm saying, help finding the next person to take them the next part of their journey.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So this part is kind of a fun question, maybe. It's like, do you find yourself analyzing your own lives, maybe each other as well, and your children?
Well, I want to say no, but I knew my daughter was here, and she wouldn't let me get away with that. So the honest answer is yes, of course we do, but we do try to turn it off, and it's not like a compelling thing. It's sort of a default button. So, but we can control it.
You know, when to stop, when to draw, and
when to just chill.
Okay.
Well, in that sense, we're good for each other because sometimes Mom wants to kind of do this, and I'm thinking, well, we talk about, is that a good idea? Is that a good boundary? There's a limit there we need to talk about? So that way we can kind of help each other when it comes to parenting, because we understand. Yeah, we're good for each other that way. Yeah.
So I'm thinking you guys don't have really heated arguments, or even with raising kids. Wow.
We don't.
I know.
We used to think there was something wrong with us because we didn't have heated arguments. We had disagreements, but we used to say, is there something wrong with us? All these other couples are arguing. But we did and I think this is so important, we did a lot of talking before we got engaged and got married, and we were very aligned with our core values, with marriage, children, and that's just made a huge difference. So it's more like, littler things, personal preference that we can sometimes disagree on, but
No, that's good to know that you guys implement and practice what you tell us about relationships, setting boundaries, and healthy parameters, and having your self-worth and self-value, and putting that into practice into your daily life.
Yes, it really does put in perspective, though, when you come back from working all day with people who are yelling and screaming at each other, and then we have some minor disagreement. It's like, that's not even on the radar screen. We're not going there. So it does kind of provide a bit of a way to say this is not anything we need to be having words about. It's not worth it. Just move on.
So I know you touched on some of the parts of where the next question. This is from a person, and I guess she's considering majoring in psychology. So she writes, I recently graduated from college with a psychology major, and I'm interested in mental health or counseling. I know it can be an emotionally intense setting, and I'm wondering how you're able to separate both your emotions and opinions when you're with patients. And second part to that is, secondly, do these sessions ever take a toll on your own mental health? How do you prevent the emotional or physical draining, and how do you recharge? I know you touched up on some of that, but if you can have any last thoughts around.
Do you want me to go? Well, you cannot go into the profession if you are a people pleaser. You cannot make people happy. In fact, a lot of counseling and therapy is timed, small confrontations, basically. It's really active listening. So I would say it's 90% listening. Listening, what is their situation? Where is their mind? Where are their thoughts? What is their heart? What can they hear? What can't they hear? Where are they at? Like, you have to be careful with what you say. Therapist, like a mother, has to be careful what they say because it's taken very seriously. And of course, because it's taken very seriously, you have to, I don't want to abuse that. So you just go into it again very eyes open. In terms, I think this is a good metaphor for what therapy is like. It's sort of like putting together a puzzle. When you're putting together a puzzle, you zoom out and you look at that puzzle box and you look at the whole thing. Then you zoom in and you look at this one little piece and what am I looking for? And then you zoom out and look at all the pieces and try to find that, and then you put it together. And there's a lot of that perspective is really important in being a therapist. Like, can I be objective? I can't help them if I'm subjective, if I enter too much into their experience. Can I maintain objectivity so I can zoom out and see it? Then as far as what do you do with the stress? Again, I remind myself I'm a human with limits. I have my own life to stress about. And because of my faith, I visualize putting their pain, the stuff they're dealing with, in my hands and kind of giving it to God. And I ask Him to carry it till our next session. I do pray for clients between sessions as they come to mind, but I really try to not take it on as my own, but to ask God to help carry that, if that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to take that kind of a approach, or you just won't last that long in the profession.
Yeah.
I've done this for 30-some years, and Rachel's been at it a long time too. So you have to have a long-term view of how therapy works, because you don't get big wins very often, and so you got to know what's motivating you. I also think it's not for everybody, and I've met some people that I've actually said, you're really not well suited for this. You need more relationship than what you're going to get, because my clients aren't my friends. I can be friendly with them, but I'm not going to be their friend. We're not going out for dinner. I'm there to help them. They're there to get help. That's where it stops. So there's a whole bunch of boundaries that wouldn't be in any other kind of relationship. And we stick to those very carefully because they're what allow us to help them. And so I can be objective enough to say things and let them be mad at me if they need to be angry with me for a while and tolerate all of that. So you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to absorb some stuff. You have to be able to deal with some really awful things. And I got a special compartment in my head for some stuff I've heard that I wouldn't really tell anybody else because it's that bad. And anyone who does this long enough will collect those experiences. Well, like, I can't believe this has happened to this person, and yet it's real. So you have to be able to do that. So I think people need to look at themselves and say, why am I going into this? If I want to help people, that's great. There's 1,000 ways to help people. Doing individual psychotherapy is only one way to do that. And there's a lot of other ways to be in the mental health field and contribute greatly. But this is a particular way of helping people that's intense. You don't know what's coming through the door sometimes. Every time I think I've seen it all, I haven't seen it all. And you got to be able to just measure it out so you can come back the next day and do the same things over again. Wow. And many of my patients I see 2 or 3 times a week. So I have to pace things out and see the big picture as to where we're trying to go. So the short version, it's not for everybody. You got to ask yourself some hard questions. Why am I doing this? Do I want to feel needed? Do I want to feel like I'm a helper? Because that's not good motivation to do this kind of work. It's just not. You really got to not just love people. I know a lot of people love people that they would not make good therapists. So you can a lot of ways to love people, but this is just one way to love them. But it's a tough path because you got to love them long term. You can't just fix them in 2 sessions and say, good, great, knowing you.
Of course, you work with severely traumatized people who really
Right, that's true.
shouldn't have been, many times they've survived things they should not have survived and be alive.
That's true. I mean, that is part of my personal journey with the therapist I've become. And I just think that's how God planned it. And He's given me the grace that I need to deal with that and to be able to help them and be there for them long term. And anything less wouldn't have helped them. It wouldn't have worked. And in fact, they come to me and they talk about all the times when they've been to therapists, they've been to psychiatrists, and they just didn't get it. They didn't understand what was going on. And they say, God brought you into my life. And you know what? I believe that.
Wow, thank you. Well, it's good to know we have, both of you as professionals, really reaching out to people and for people who are needed by you so much. So, yeah, and staying in as long as you are, we thank you for that. So, and thank you for your valuable insight. I think that would be really helpful for some people who are considering this path as a profession. So
go in with your eyes open.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.